A decorated war veteran walks into an upscale restaurant hoping for one peaceful dinner, his first alone in 2 years. Within minutes, the manager orders him out. Not for causing trouble, not for breaking rules, but for having a service dog, for being the wrong kind of customer. The room falls silent. Humiliation burns. But 4 strangers at a nearby table. Navy SEALs slowly rise from their seats. What happens next will. Jen, shake this city to its core. Stay until the end and comment your city below so I can see how far this story travels. The San Diego sunset painted Bella Vista in shades of amber and gold, the kind of light that made everything look expensive, deliberate, perfect. The restaurant sat perched on a corner of Little Italy, where cobblestone streets met modern wealth, where tourists paid $50 for pasta and called it authentic. Through the floor-to-ceiling windows, you could see the carefully curated interior white tablecloths that had never known a stain. Wine glasses that caught the light like diamonds waiters who moved with the practiced grace of ballet dancers. Jake Morrison sat in his adapted van across the street for 17 minutes before he found the courage to open the door. 17 minutes of staring at that golden light. 17 minutes of his hands trembling on the steering wheel. 17 minutes of telling himself that this time would be different, that he deserved this, that he could do this one simple thing that everyone else did without thinking. Just dinner. Just one goddamn dinner. He was 34 years old, and he'd forgotten what normal felt like. The prosthetics felt heavy tonight, they always did when his mind was working overtime. His left leg from the knee down, his right from mid-thigh. State-of-the-art technology that cost more than most people's cars, and they still felt like they belonged to someone else. He'd been fitted for them 18 months ago. At Walter Reed had done, the physical therapy, had pushed through the pain that felt like his missing limbs were being torn off all over again, every single day. But the real amputation, the one that no surgery could address, was the piece of himself he'd left in the sand outside Kandahar. "Okay, Rex," he whispered to the German shepherd in the passenger seat. "Let's do this." Rex's dark eyes met his calm and knowing. The dog had been with him for 11 months now, a service animal trained to detect the panic attacks before Jake even knew they were coming, to apply pressure during the nightmares to create space in crowds when the walls started closing in. More than a dog, more than a companion. A lifeline wrapped in fur and loyalty. Jake checked his reflection in the rearview mirror. He'd shaved carefully, put on his best button-down shirt. The blue one his sister said brought out his eyes. He'd even attempted to tame his hair, though the military cut didn't leave much room for styling. He looked normal. Almost. The van's lift lowered him to street level with a mechanical whir that sounded impossibly loud in the evening quiet. A few pedestrians glanced over, then quickly looked away. He was used to that, the awkward dance of people pretending not to notice, not to stare, not to acknowledge the wheelchair or the dog, or the visible absence of what should be there. He crossed the street with Rex, walking perfectly beside him. The dog's red vest clearly marked "Service Animal. Do not pet." They'd practiced this route 3 times this week, Jake rolling past the restaurant building up to this moment. His therapist at the VA called it exposure therapy. Jake called it torture with a clipboard. The hostess stand was 10 feet from the door. Might as well have been 10 miles. His heart hammered against his ribs, that old familiar rhythm he knew from firefights and IED checks and the moment before the explosion that changed everything. But this wasn't combat. This was dinner. Normal people did this every day. He could do this. The door was heavy, old-world brass and etched glass. For a moment he wondered if he could even open it from the chair. But then a young couple exited holding it for him with those same, carefully not staring smiles, and he was through into the golden light, into the soft murmur of conversation and clinking glasses, and the smell of garlic and wine and money. The hostess was young, maybe 23, with dark hair pulled into a sleek ponytail and a smile that seemed genuine. Her name tag read Sarah. "Good evening, sir. Welcome to Bella Vista." Her eyes dropped to Rex, and something flickered across her face. Not disgust, not fear, but uncertainty. Table for one," Jake said, keeping his voice steady. "I have a reservation. Morrison, 6:30. Sarah glanced at her computer screen, then back at Rex, then at Jake. "Yes, I see it here. But, She lowered her voice, leaning in slightly. "I'm not sure about the dog. I need to check with my manager." And there it was. The first crack in the evening. The first sign that normal was still just outside his reach. "He's a service animal," Jake said quietly. "He's protected under the ADA, Americans with Disabilities Act." "I know, Sarah bit her lip, genuine distress in her eyes. "I'm sorry. Just one moment, please." She disappeared into the restaurant's interior, leaving Jake at the hostess stand like a piece of furniture. He could feel eyes on him now, diners glancing over curiosity or concern or judgment, he couldn't tell which. Rex pressed against his leg a gentle reminder. "I'm here. You're not alone." In a corner booth near the windows, 4 men in civilian clothes watched the scene unfold, with the kind of attention most people reserved for car accidents. They'd clocked Jake the moment he entered the wheelchair, the dog, the way he held himself with military precision, despite everything. You could always tell. Lieutenant Commander Marcus "Shark" Rodriguez set down his wine glass with deliberate care. He was a lean, dangerous-looking man in his late 30s with close-cropped black hair and eyes that missed nothing. 14 years in the teams. 6 deployments, more confirmed kills than he cared to remember, and a chest full of medals he kept in a drawer at home because they felt like weights around his neck. "You seeing this?" His voice was barely above a murmur, meant only for the 3 men sharing his table. "Yeah," Tank Thompson rumbled. He was aptly named 6'4", 240 pounds of pure muscle, a breaching specialist who could kick down doors or perform cardiac surgery with equal precision depending on what the mission required. "Staff sergeant, judging by how he carries himself. Army, probably. Recent injury." Viper Martinez, the team's communications specialist, leaned back in his chair. He was compact, wiry, with the kind of face that could blend into any crowd, useful for the kind of work they did. "That's a mobility service dog. PTSD indicators too, probably. And he's about to get fucked over." The 4th man, known only as Ghost, said nothing. He never said much. Thin pale with eyes like chips of ice, he was the team's sniper, the one who could remain motionless for 18 hours and then take a shot that would end a war. He simply watched his gaze moving from Jake to the interior of the restaurant, tracking Sarah's path, like he was calculating ranges and wind speeds. Vincent Caruso emerged from the back with the kind of self-importance that came from owning something expensive. He was 52, well-dressed in a suit that probably cost more than Jake's prosthetics, with silver threading through his carefully styled hair. He'd opened Bella Vista 6 years ago with money from his father's construction business, had built it into one of San Diego's premier dining destinations, had been featured in magazines and blog posts and all the right social media feeds. He had a reputation to protect, standards to maintain, an image to preserve. And that image in his mind did not include wheelchairs and service dogs. Sarah was speaking to him in hushed, urgent tones near the bar. Jake couldn't hear the words, but he could read the body language, her apologetic gestures, Caruso's stiffening posture, the way his face hardened into something ugly beneath the expensive grooming. Caruso's eyes found Jake across the restaurant, and in that moment Jake knew. He'd seen that look before in 1,000 different contexts. Disgust dressed up as concern, prejudice wearing the mask of policy. The look that said, "You don't belong here." His stomach turned over. Maybe he should just leave, save everyone the trouble. There were other restaurants, other nights, other chances to feel normal. He could order takeout, eat in the van, pretend this never happened. Add it to the list of things that didn't work out, goals that remained just out of reach, moments when he wasn't quite enough. But then Rex leaned harder against him, and he remembered what Dr. Chen had said in their last session. The world doesn't get to decide your worth, Jake. You do. Vincent Caruso approached with a smile that never reached his eyes. Sarah trailed behind him, her face flushed with embarrassment. "Good evening, sir." Caruso's voice was smooth, practiced the tone of someone delivering bad news with plausible deniability. "I understand you have a reservation." "Yes," Jake said. "Morrison, 6:30, table for 1. "I see." Caruso's eyes dropped to Rex with barely concealed distaste. "I'm afraid we have a policy here at Bella Vista. We don't accommodate animals." The words hung in the air like a slap. Jake felt his face flush, but he kept his voice level. Training. Always fall back on training. "This is a service animal, sir. He's protected under federal law. The Americans with Disabilities Act requires that service animals be allowed in all public accommodations, including restaurants." "I'm aware of the ADA," Caruso said, though his tone suggested he wished he wasn't. "However, Bella Vista is a private establishment. We have the right to refuse service to anyone. Health codes you understand. Sanitation standards. Service dogs are specifically exempt from health code restrictions," Jake replied, and he hated how his voice was starting to shake, hated that he had to argue for basic dignity, hated that this moment was happening at all. "The ADA is federal law. It supersedes local health codes." In the corner, Rodriguez's hand tightened on his napkin. Tank's jaw clenched. Viper was already pulling out his phone, not to record, not yet, but to document, to be ready. Ghost simply stood up, smooth and silent, a predator, recognizing the moment before the kill. The restaurant had gone quiet. Not completely silent. There was still the soft jazz playing, still the distant clatter of kitchen work. But the conversations had dropped to whispers, and every eye in the room was on the confrontation at the hostess stand. Caruso's smile vanished, replaced by something harder, uglier. "Sir, I'm going to have to ask you to leave. We have other guests to consider, and your situation is causing a disturbance." "My situation," Jake's voice cracked on the words. "I'm a paying customer trying to have dinner." "You're a disruption." Caruso snapped his composure, finally slipping. "Look around. You're making people uncomfortable. This is a fine dining establishment, not a—" He caught himself, but the words were already there, unspoken, but understood. "Not a place for people like you." Sarah touched Caruso's arm. "Sir, maybe we could just—" "Sarah, this doesn't concern you," Caruso said, without looking at her. "Go seat the Andersons. They've been waiting." Something broke inside Jake then. Not loudly, not dramatically, but like a hairline fracture in glass, the kind you don't notice until the whole thing shatters. He'd survived an IED blast. He'd endured months of surgery and rehabilitation. He'd fought through PTSD and phantom pain, and the endless crushing weight of trying to rebuild a life from fragments. And he was being kicked out of a restaurant for having the audacity to need help. "Please," he said, and he hated the word, even as it left his mouth, hated the begging quality of it, hated that he was reduced to this. "I just want to have dinner. One meal. I haven't eaten out alone in 2 years. I'm not causing problems. I'm not bothering anyone. I just want to feel normal for one goddamn hour." Caruso's face remained impassive. "Security will escort you out if necessary." The words hit like a physical blow. Jake felt Rex tense beside him, the dog sensing his rising panic, the cortisol flooding his system, the fight-or-flight response kicking in. But there was nowhere to fight, nowhere to flee. Just the humiliation of being ejected from a restaurant like he was trash, like his service meant nothing, like his sacrifice had earned him nothing but the right to be invisible. He started to turn his wheelchair around, defeat settling over him like a familiar coat. And then Lieutenant Commander Marcus Rodriguez stood up. The movement was deliberate, controlled the kind of motion that drew the eye, because it came from a man who knew how to command attention without demanding it. He was 6 feet of coiled muscle and quiet authority, wearing jeans and a black polo shirt that did nothing to hide his military bearing. Behind him, Tank rose to his full imposing height. Then Viper, compact and dangerous. Then Ghost, who seemed to materialize rather than stand suddenly present in a way he hadn't been before. 4 Navy SEALs off duty, but never truly off, moving with the synchronized precision of men who'd breached doors together, who'd covered each other's six in firefights, who'd carried wounded brothers through streets that wanted them dead. They crossed the restaurant in formation. Not rushed, not aggressive, but with the kind of purpose that made other diners instinctively lean back, made space open up around them, made even Vincent Caruso pause in his dismissal of Jake Morrison. Rodriguez reached the hostess stand first, positioning himself slightly between Jake and Caruso, not threatening, not obvious, but there. Present. A wall of muscle and loyalty and brotherhood that didn't dissolve just because you came home. "Is there a problem here, sir?" Rodriguez's voice was calm, almost conversational, but it carried the weight of command, the tone of a man used to being obeyed in situations far more dangerous than a restaurant confrontation. Caruso's eyes narrowed. "This is a private matter between myself and this gentleman. It doesn't concern you." "Well, see, that's where you're wrong," Tank said, his deep voice rumbling like distant thunder. "Because that there is a staff sergeant. Combat veteran judging by the injuries and the dog, which makes it very much our concern." Jake looked up at the 4 men surrounding him, confusion and hope warring on his face. He didn't know them, had never seen them before. But there was something in their stance, in their eyes, that he recognized, the look of men who understood what it meant to be left behind, to be forgotten, to be treated as less than human, after giving everything for people who'd never know their names. "I don't know who you think you are," Caruso said, his voice rising slightly. "But I'm the owner of this establishment, and I have the right to refuse service to anyone I choose. This doesn't involve you, so I suggest you return to your table before I call the police." Viper smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "Please do call them. We'd love to have a conversation with law enforcement about federal disability discrimination laws. I'm sure they'd be fascinated." "Are you threatening me?" Caruso's face flushed red. "I could have you all arrested for harassment." "We're just having a conversation," Rodriguez said mildly. 4 concerned citizens discussing the law with a business owner who seems confused about his legal obligations. Sarah stood frozen near the bar, her eyes wide. Around the restaurant, phones had appeared, not obviously, not all at once, but they were there, recording, documenting, ready to turn a private humiliation into a public reckoning. "Gentlemen, please." Caruso tried to regain his composure, smoothing down his jacket. I understand you're trying to be helpful, but this is a matter of restaurant policy. We have standards to maintain ambiance, to preserve. Surely you can understand. What I understand. Ghost spoke for the first time, his voice quiet but cutting, is that this man served his country, lost parts of himself in the process, and now you're trying to throw him out because his sacrifice makes you uncomfortable. The words fell into the restaurant like stones into still water ripples of uncomfortable silence spreading outward. Jake's hands gripped his wheelchair's armrests, knuckles white. He wanted to speak, to thank these strangers, to tell Caruso exactly what he thought of his standards and his ambiance and his carefully curated image. But his throat was tight, his chest constricting, the familiar signs of a panic attack creeping in at the edges. Rex whined softly, pressing his body against Jake's leg, applying the deep pressure that was supposed to ground him, to bring him back from the edge. But the edge was closer now than it had been in months. Caruso's face had gone from red to nearly purple. That's enough. All of you need to leave, now, or I will call the police and I will have you arrested for trespassing. Trespassing? Tank let out a low whistle. That's creative. How do you figure we're trespassing when we're paying customers who haven't been asked to leave until just now? And he, Viper gestured to Jake, has a legal reservation and a legal right to be served with his service animal. So if anyone's breaking the law here, boss, it ain't us. Rodriguez pulled out his wallet, extracting a business card with deliberate slowness. Here's my attorney's number. You might want to give him a call before this goes any further. Or you could just seat the staff sergeant, let him have his dinner, and we can all pretend this ugly little moment never happened. Caruso stared at the card like it was a snake. Around them, the restaurant had fully committed to watching the confrontation now. No more pretending to eat, no more hushed conversations. This was the show, the moment that would define their evening, the story they'd tell for weeks. A woman in her 60s at a nearby table cleared her throat. Excuse me, but I think these gentlemen are right. I didn't serve 30 years as a nurse to watch a veteran be treated like this. My son's in Afghanistan, another diner called out a middle-aged man in a business suit. 4th deployment. And if this is how we treat our soldiers when they come home, what the hell are we fighting for? The tide was turning, shifting, the room's energy moving away from Caruso's carefully maintained control, and toward something messier, more honest, more dangerous to his reputation. Caruso's hand moved to his pocket, pulling out his phone. Fine. You want to make this difficult? I'm calling 911. We'll let the police sort this out. Jesus Christ, Viper muttered. He's actually going to do it. Let him, Rodriguez said calmly. We've got nothing to hide. 4 decorated SEALs, 1 combat veteran with a legal service dog, and 1 restaurant owner violating federal law. Let's see how that plays on the evening news. Sarah stepped forward, her voice shaking, but determined. Mr. Caruso, please. This isn't worth it. We can just seat him and... Sarah, if you want to keep your job, you'll be quiet. Caruso's voice was ice. This is my restaurant, and I decide who gets served. Not the government, not these thugs, and certainly not a girl who's been working here for 3 months. The threat hung in the air, ugly and unmistakable. Tank's hands curled into fists. Ghost's eyes went flat and cold. Viper started recording openly now, phone held high. And Rodriguez smiled, but it was the smile of a man watching an enemy make a fatal tactical error. You just threatened to fire her for supporting a disabled veteran's legal rights, he said quietly, in front of witnesses, while being recorded. That's not just illegal, friend. That's career suicide. Caruso's finger hovered over his phone screen, shaking slightly. He was trapped now, caught between his pride and his survival instinct, and everyone in the room could see it. Jake finally found his voice. Just stop. It came out barely above a whisper, but in the silence it carried. "Please, just stop. I'll go. It's fine. I'll go." "No," Rodriguez said firmly. "You won't." "Staff Sergeant," Tank addressed Jake directly, using his rank, with the kind of respect that couldn't be faked. "With all due respect, sir, we've got your 6. You're not going anywhere except to a table." Martinez knelt beside Jake's wheelchair, lowering himself to eye level. "Brother, I don't know you. Don't know your story, don't know your unit. But I know that look in your eyes. I've seen it in the mirror. And I'll be damned if I stand by and watch some." He glanced at Caruso. "Some civilian bean counter make you feel less than what you are." Tears pricked at Jake's eyes. He blinked them back hard, but one escaped, tracking down his cheek. Rex licked his hand, a gentle reminder of unconditional love and support. "I just wanted dinner," Jake said again, and the words broke something in the room, shattered whatever facade of civility had been holding. A young man at the bar stood up, walking over. "I'm a lawyer," he said, addressing Caruso, "and I'll represent Mr." He glanced at Jake. "Morrison. Jake Morrison. I'll represent Mr. Morrison pro bono if this goes to court. And trust me, sir, you will lose. Badly. The ADA doesn't mess around, and neither does the press when it comes to mistreated veterans." An elderly couple approached the man leaning on a cane. "We'd like to pay for this young man's dinner," the woman said. "All of their dinners," she added, gesturing to the seals. "It's the least we can do." "I'll match that," the businessman called out, "and donate the same amount to Wounded Warrior Project." The restaurant was transforming, shifting from a place of quiet wealth and careful manners into something rawer, more honest. People were standing, moving, speaking up the social contract that said, "Mind your own business," dissolving in the face of something that demanded witness, demanded action. Caruso stood frozen, his phone still in his hand, watching his carefully constructed world crumble around him. This wasn't supposed to happen. This was supposed to be simple. Ask the problem to leave, maintain the standards, preserve the image. How had it spiraled into this? "Make the call," Rodriguez said softly. "Dial 911. Let's see where this goes." The restaurant held its breath. Vincent Caruso's finger trembled over the screen of his phone, hovering above the emergency call button like a man standing at the edge of a cliff, knowing the fall would destroy him, but unable to step back. The entire restaurant seemed to lean forward collectively, holding its breath, waiting for the decision that would define everything that came next. He pressed the button. The sound of the dial tone seemed impossibly loud in the crystalline silence. Everyone heard it, the electronic purr of connection, then the distant voice of the 911 operator, tinny and professional, through the phone's speaker. 911, what's your emergency? Caruso's voice, when it came, was strained but determined. Yes, I need police at Bella Vista Restaurant on India Street. I have several individuals refusing to leave my establishment and threatening my staff. Rodriguez's eyebrows rose slightly. Tank let out a low whistle of disbelief. Viper's phone camera captured every word, every facial expression, every damning second of what was about to become viral evidence. Threatening your staff, the operator's voice sharpened. Are weapons involved? Is anyone injured? No weapons, but they're being aggressive, intimidating. I've asked them to leave multiple times and they're refusing. I need officers here immediately. Sarah's face had gone pale as paper. She opened her mouth as if to protest, then closed it again, her jaw hanging in the balance like a sword over her head. Jake sat frozen in his wheelchair, Rex pressed against him so hard the dog was practically climbing into his lap. This was spiraling beyond anything he'd imagined. He'd just wanted dinner. One normal evening. And now police were coming and he was at the center of it, and the panic was rising in his chest like floodwater drowning him from the inside. Sir, the operator was saying, officers are en route. Can you describe the individuals causing the disturbance? Caruso's eyes swept over the SEALs with barely concealed contempt. 4 men, all physically imposing mid-30s to early 40s. They're surrounding one of my employees and a customer blocking access. That's a lie. The elderly woman who'd offered to pay for dinner called out, her voice sharp with indignation. They're not blocking anything. They're standing up for a veteran being discriminated against. Ma'am, please, Caruso hissed, covering the phone's microphone. This doesn't concern you. The hell it doesn't, her husband barked, straightening despite his cane. I fought in Korea. My son fought in Desert Storm. And I'll be damned if I sit here and watch you persecute a boy who gave his legs for this country. The operator's voice came through, muffled but audible. Sir, what's happening there? I'm hearing multiple voices. Rodriguez stepped forward, his movements slow and deliberate, hands visible at his sides, the posture of a man who knew how to de-escalate, who'd talked down hostage situations in 3 different countries, who understood that control came from calmness, not force. Mr. Caruso, he said, his voice carrying that same steady authority. I strongly suggest you tell the truth to that operator, because in about 5 minutes when the police arrive, they're going to see a disabled veteran with a legal service dog surrounded by witnesses who will testify that you violated federal law. And that recording? He nodded toward Viper's phone, then gestured around the room where at least a dozen other phones were now openly filming. That recording is going to show exactly what happened here. Caruso's face cycled through emotions: anger, fear, stubborn pride, calculation. His reputation was already damaged, but maybe he could still come out looking like the victim of aggressive customers. Still, sir. The operator's voice cut through his thoughts. I need you to respond. Are you in immediate danger? The question hung there like a judgment. Caruso looked at Rodriguez, calm, controlled, dangerous, in the way that truly competent men always were. Looked at Tank, massive arms crossed, but standing perfectly still. At Viper, recording everything. At Ghost, who somehow seemed more present in his stillness than most men did in motion. Then his eyes found Jake Morrison. The veteran sat in his wheelchair, one hand buried in Rex's fur, and for just a moment, just a flash, Caruso saw past the inconvenience, past the disruption to his carefully curated image. He saw a man barely holding himself together, saw the tremor in his shoulders, saw the way his jaw clenched against emotion, saw the raw vulnerability of someone who'd been broken and was fighting like hell to be whole again. And something shifted behind Caruso's eyes. Not redemption. Not yet. But maybe recognition. Maybe the first crack in the armor of his own certainty. No, he said into the phone, his voice suddenly hollow. No, I'm not in danger. But you said, I made a mistake. I'm sorry to have wasted your time. We don't need officers. It's being resolved. Sir, we have units already en route. If you're being coerced, I'm not being coerced. Caruso's voice firmed up slightly. It was a misunderstanding. I apologize for the false alarm. There was a pause on the other end, the operator clearly uncertain. The responding officers may still come by to verify, sir. Standard protocol. I understand. Thank you. Caruso ended the call, his hand dropping to his side like it weighed 1,000 pounds. The restaurant remained silent, but it was a different kind of silence now, not anticipatory, but processing, everyone trying to understand what had just happened, what it meant, where things would go from here. Sarah's hand was pressed to her mouth, tears streaming down her face. The businessman who'd offered to donate was nodding slowly, as if confirming something to himself. The lawyer at the bar had his phone out, presumably ready to make good on his offer of representation, if needed. Rodriguez didn't move, didn't celebrate, didn't gloat. He simply waited, giving Caruso space to make the next decision, the one that would actually matter. "However," Caruso said, and his voice had changed, still not friendly, still not warm, but something had thawed in it, something rigid had begun to bend. "The officers may still come, and when they do—" He looked directly at Jake, for the first time really looked at him, and something like shame flickered across his features. "When they do, they're going to ask questions. They're going to want to know what happened here." "Then we'll tell them the truth," Jake said, finding his voice again stronger now, despite the trembling in his core. "That I tried to have dinner, that you tried to kick me out for having a service dog, that these men stood up for me when no one else would." "The truth," Caruso repeated, tasting the words like something bitter. He was quiet for a moment, then seemed to make a decision. "Sarah, please seat Mr. Morrison, and his companions if they'd like to join him." The words came out stilted, forced, but they came. Sarah moved immediately, grabbing menus with shaking hands. "Of course. Right this way, Mr. Morrison. Gentlemen." But Rodriguez held up a hand, stopping the forward motion. "Not yet." His eyes were locked on Caruso, reading him the way he'd read enemy combatants, insurgent leaders, anyone whose next move might mean life or death. "You're seating him because you're afraid of the consequences, because you know you're wrong legally. But do you understand why you're wrong morally?" The question landed like a physical blow. Caruso's mouth opened closed. He looked around the restaurant, his dream, his legacy, and saw it transformed into a courtroom, a theater, a stage where his character was being judged and found wanting. He started, then stopped, started again. "I was trying to protect my business, my reputation. This is a fine dining establishment, and I thought—" He couldn't finish the sentence. "You thought he'd lower the tone?" Tank filled. In his voice, rumbling with controlled anger. "You thought a man in a wheelchair with a service dog would make your rich customers uncomfortable. You thought his sacrifice, his service, his disability was bad for business." Each word was a hammer blow, driving the truth deeper. Caruso flinched. Yes, I thought that. I was wrong." "You were worse than wrong," the elderly woman said, standing now, her voice carrying the weight of years and wisdom and bitter experience. "You were cruel. My husband came home from Korea with pieces of shrapnel still in his back. 40 years and he still sets off metal detectors. 40 years and he still has nightmares. And for 40 years people like you have looked at men like him and seen problems instead of heroes." Her husband nodded, gripping his cane. "We don't ask for worship, son. We don't ask for parades. We just ask to be treated like human beings, to have dinner without being made to feel like freaks." Jake's shoulders shook. He was crying now, silently, tears streaming down his face that he didn't bother to wipe away. Rex whined, licking at his hands, his face trying to absorb the pain that was pouring out of his human. "I lost my legs in Kandahar," Jake said, his voice breaking. "IED. I was on patrol with my unit, and there was an explosion, and when I woke up 3 days later, they were gone. Just gone. And I thought I'd lost everything. My career, my independence, my future. But I fought back. I did the therapy, got the prosthetics, learned to walk again, learned to live again. And my therapist, she said I should try to do normal things. Go to a restaurant. See a movie. Reconnect with the world." He looked up at Caruso, and his eyes were red-rimmed but blazing. "This was supposed to be my first step back into normal, and you tried to take even that away from me." The words fell into the restaurant like bombs, each one detonating something in the hearts of everyone listening. A woman 2 tables over was sobbing openly. A waiter had his hand over his mouth, shoulders shaking. Even some of the harder-looking businessmen had turned away, blinking rapidly, pretending something was in their eyes. Caruso stood there, And for the first time since this all began, he looked genuinely completely broken. Not afraid of consequences, though that fear was still there, but broken by the weight of what he'd done, what he'd tried to do, what he represented. "I'm sorry," he said, and his voice was barely audible. "Mr. Morrison, I'm so sorry." "Are you?" Rodriguez pressed, because this was the moment that mattered, the moment where change was possible, or everything reverted back to comfortable prejudice. "Are you sorry because you got caught? Because people are filming? Because your reputation is at risk? Or are you sorry because you finally see what you did?" Caruso looked at Jake. Really looked at him. Saw past the wheelchair and the dog and the prosthetics to the man underneath the soldier, the human being who'd given pieces of himself to protect people he'd never meet in places most Americans couldn't find on a map. "I see him," Caruso whispered. "I see what I did. And I'm ashamed." The admission seemed to cost him something, seemed to physically hurt as it left his mouth. Outside, the sound of sirens grew closer. The police were coming anyway, protocol dictating that they check on canceled emergency calls, especially ones that sounded as confused and potentially dangerous as Caruso's had been. "They're almost here," Viper said quietly. 2 units, maybe 3 based on the sound. A ghost moved to the window, watching the street with the intensity of a man used to tracking threats. 2 patrol cars. Officers are exiting. 4 total. He relayed the information without inflection, pure data, but his positioning was deliberate between the door and Jake, creating a protective corridor without making it obvious. Rodriguez made a decision. "Tank Viper with me at the door. Go stay with the staff sergeant. Sarah." He turned to the hostess, who was still frozen menus clutched to her chest. "Get him water, and a seat if you can manage it without checking with anyone." Sarah nodded rapidly, grateful to have a task, something to do, that didn't require her to navigate the impossible social dynamics of the moment. The SEALs moved with practiced efficiency, positioning themselves near the entrance, but not blocking it, visible, but not threatening. They knew how this worked. Knew that how the next 5 minutes played out could determine whether this ended with handshakes or handcuffs, whether Jake's story became one of triumph or one more tale of a veteran crushed by civilian indifference. The door opened, and 2 officers entered, a male and a female, both in their mid-30s, both wearing the wary expressions of cops responding to a situation that had already changed before they arrived. The male officer was Asian, with sharp eyes that swept the restaurant in a practiced tactical assessment. His nameplate read, Wong. His partner was African-American, athletic, with the kind of controlled presence that came from years of de-escalating domestic disputes and bar fights and every other human crisis that required both authority and compassion. Davis was embossed on her nameplate. Behind them, 2 more officers entered backup standard procedure for a potential disturbance call involving multiple individuals. Wong's eyes found the cluster of people at the hostess stand, the 4 obvious former military. The man in the wheelchair, the dog, the manager, who looked like he wanted to disappear into the floor. His hand didn't go to his weapon, but it rested near it, ready. "Sergeant Wong, SDPD," he announced, his voice carrying authority without aggression. "We received a 911 call about a disturbance. The call was canceled, but we're here to verify everyone's safe. Who wants to tell me what's going on?" The restaurant had fallen silent again, but this silence was electric, charged with possibility and danger in equal measure. Caruso stepped forward, and you could see the calculation in his eyes, how to spin this, how to minimize damage, how to come out looking like the reasonable party. But then his eyes found Jake again, found the tears still wet on the veteran's face, and something stopped him. Some last vestige of conscience, or maybe just the recognition that he was already caught, already exposed, already beyond the reach of comfortable lies. "Officer, I made a mistake, Caruso said, his voice steadier, now resigned. I tried to refuse service to Mr. Morrison here because he has a service dog. I was wrong. I violated federal law and I apologize. Wong's eyebrows rose slightly. Davis glanced at her partner, surprise evident in her expression. This wasn't how these calls usually went. Usually everyone was yelling, blaming, demanding arrests. Confessions were rare, especially this quick, this unforced. You refused service to a customer with a service dog, Davis asked, her voice carefully neutral. She moved closer to Jake, her eyes taking in the wheelchair, the prosthetics, the red vest on Rex, that clearly marked him as a working animal. A service dog that's properly identified and presumably certified. Yes, ma'am, Caruso said, and the ma'am was automatic, respectful, the ingrained politeness of a man raised to defer to authority, even as he'd violated a higher law. Wong pulled out a notepad, but his eyes were on Rodriguez and the other SEALs, recognizing something in their bearing. And you gentlemen are Lieutenant Commander Marcus Rodriguez, Naval Special Warfare. Rodriguez's military ID was in his hand before Wong finished the question. These are members of my team. We were having dinner when we witnessed the incident. Wong examined the ID, then looked at Rodriguez with new understanding. SEAL team members weren't unknown in San Diego. The city was home to Naval Base Coronado, where the teams trained and operated from. But seeing them involved in a civilian altercation was unusual. You witnessed Mr. Caruso refuse service to... Wong looked at Jake. Staff Sergeant Jake Morrison, U.S. Army, retired. Tank supplied his voice, carrying both respect and an edge of challenge, daring anyone to question Jake's credentials or his rights. Davis moved closer to Jake, her expression softening. Staff Sergeant Morrison, are you all right? Do you need medical attention? Jake shook his head, not trusting his voice. Rex leaned against him harder, and he buried his fingers in the dog's fur, anchoring himself. He needs dinner, Rodriguez said flatly, which he has a legal right to receive. The Americans with Disabilities Act is very clear on this point. Service animals must be accommodated in all public facilities, including restaurants. Mr. Caruso's refusal to seat the staff sergeant constitutes a direct violation of federal law. Wong was writing now, his pen moving across the notepad with quick, efficient strokes. Mr. Caruso, is this accurate? You refused to seat Mr. Morrison specifically because of his service dog. Caruso's throat worked. Around them, phones were still recording, still documenting, still building a digital record that would outlive everyone in the room. Yes, I told him we don't accommodate animals. I cited health codes, private property rights. I was wrong. You were breaking the law, Davis corrected, and there was steel in her voice now. She turned to Jake. Sir, you have the right to file a formal complaint. This is a civil rights violation. The Department of Justice takes ADA violations very seriously. Jake looked up at her, and for a moment you could see him processing the enormity of it, that he had the power here, that the law was on his side, that these officers were treating him not as a problem, but as a victim. Someone whose rights had been trampled and deserved protection. I just wanted dinner, he said again, the refrain that had defined this whole nightmare. I don't want to file complaints or sue anyone. I just want to be treated like a person. The simplicity of the statement, the raw exhaustion in his voice, seemed to hit Davis like a physical force. She crouched down beside his wheelchair, bringing herself to eye level, a gesture of respect, of equality, of seeing him as a human being, rather than a case number. You are a person, Staff Sergeant, she said quietly. You're a person who served, who sacrificed, and who deserves better than this. And while I understand you just want to move on, sometimes moving on means making sure this doesn't happen to the next veteran who walks through that door. Wong had moved to Caruso, now his notepad still in hand. "Mr. Caruso, I'm going to need to see your business license and health permits. And I need you to understand something very clearly. What happened here tonight is a federal civil rights violation. Mr. Morrison could file a complaint with the Department of Justice, could sue you personally and your business, and based on what I've seen and heard, including witness testimony and video evidence, he would win." Caruso nodded mutely, his face ashen. "However," Wong continued, his voice taking on a different tone, "how this proceeds is largely up to Mr. Morrison. He's the aggrieved party. If he chooses to pursue this, we'll provide full support and documentation. If he chooses not to, that's his right. But either way, Mr. Caruso, you need to understand that this—" He gestured around the restaurant. "This doesn't just go away. This happened. People saw it. It's recorded. And your choices right now will determine whether you're remembered as the man who discriminated against a veteran or the man who learned from his mistake and made it right." The weight of Wong's words settled over the restaurant like snow, quiet but transformative, covering everything in a new reality that couldn't be ignored or brushed away. Caruso stood there, his expensive suit suddenly looking like a costume his carefully constructed authority revealed as the fragile thing it had always been. Davis remained crouched beside Jake, her hand resting gently on the arm of his wheelchair, not restraining, not patronizing, just present, a silent message that he wasn't alone in this moment. Her eyes held something Jake hadn't seen enough of lately: genuine respect, the kind that came from understanding what sacrifice actually meant. "Staff Sergeant," she said softly, "I need you to know something. My brother," her voice caught slightly. "My brother was Army, 3rd Infantry Division. He didn't make it home from Iraq." She took a breath, steadying herself. "So when I see someone like you, someone who gave so much and came home to face this kind of treatment, it matters to me, personally. What you decide to do here, that's your choice, but you have support. Whatever you need, Jake's eyes filled again, but this time the tears felt different, not shame or humiliation, but something closer to relief, to being seen, to mattering. "I'm sorry about your brother," he managed, his voice rough. "He'd have stood up for you too," Davis said, a sad smile crossing her face. "Just like these gentlemen did." She glanced at Rodriguez and his team with appreciation. The second pair of officers had fanned out, taking statements from diners, their presence a reminder that this was now an official incident, documented and real. One of them, a younger officer with red hair and freckles, was speaking quietly with the elderly veteran couple. The other, a stocky Latino officer, was interviewing the businessman who'd offered to donate. Wong had moved to the center of the restaurant, his authority filling the space in a way that Caruso's never quite had. "Folks, I know this has been a disrupting evening. We're going to need statements from anyone who witnessed the initial confrontation. If you saw what happened when Mr. Morrison first arrived, please remain for a few minutes. Everyone else, you're free to continue your meals or leave as you prefer." Nobody left. Not a single person reached for their coat or signaled for a check. They all stayed bound together by what they'd witnessed, by the collective shame of almost letting it happen, by the redemptive possibility of making it right. Sarah approached cautiously, still clutching those menus like a lifeline. "Officers, I was the hostess who first greeted Mr. Morrison. I saw everything. I can give a statement." "Thank you, Miss," Wong said, noting her name. "We'll get to you shortly." Caruso cleared his throat, and every eye in the room turned to him. He looked smaller, somehow diminished, as if the last 30 minutes had physically reduced him. "Officer Wong, I take full responsibility for what happened here. Sarah was trying to help. She told me it was wrong, but I threatened her job if she didn't comply with my orders. The fault is entirely mine." Sarah's eyes went wide. She'd expected to be blamed, expected to be the sacrifice that might save Caruso's reputation. The admission stunned her into silence. Rodriguez watched Caruso carefully, still reading him, still assessing whether this was genuine contrition or damage control. The man was walking a tightrope now. Any false note, any hint of manipulation, and the room would turn on him completely. But there was something in Caruso's posture, in the way his shoulders had collapsed inward, that suggested the facade was cracking, maybe breaking entirely. "Mr. Caruso," Wong said, his voice carrying the weight of potential consequences. "You understand that threatening an employee for attempting to comply with federal law is itself illegal. That's retaliation, and it can carry separate penalties." Caruso nodded, his throat working. "I understand. I was wrong. About all of it." Tank shifted his weight, arms still crossed over his massive chest. "Saying you're wrong isn't the same as making it right," he rumbled. "Words are easy. Actions are what count." "You're absolutely right," Caruso said, turning to face the SEAL. "Words are insufficient. But I don't know. I don't know what actions could possibly address what I've done here." "Start by seating the man," Viper said, his phone still recording, capturing everything for posterity. "Actually follow through on what you said. Give him the best table in the house. Treat him like the hero he is." Caruso looked at Jake, really looked at him, and something seemed to crystallize in his expression. Not quite redemption, not yet, but maybe the beginning of understanding. "Mr. Morrison, would you allow me to seat you, please? And your companions. Dinner is on the house, of course. Whatever you'd like." "And he faltered, then pushed through. "I'd like to hear your story, if you're willing to share it. I think I need to hear it." The request hung in the air, unexpected and vulnerable in a way that commands never were. Jake's hand tightened in Rex's fur. The dog looked up at him with those dark, knowing eyes, as if asking, "What do you need right now? What serves you?" "I don't want your pity," Jake said finally, his voice stronger now, finding its footing. "I don't want to be your redemption project or your PR recovery story." "No," Caruso agreed quickly. "No, that's not. I don't expect redemption. I don't deserve it. But I do want to understand. I want to know what I almost destroyed tonight, not for my sake, for the next person who walks through that door, who I might not recognize, might not see, might not understand." Rodriguez caught Jake's eye, a silent question passing between them. The SEAL gave the slightest nod, a gesture that said, "Your call, brother. We've got your back, either way." Jake took a shaky breath. Rex pressed against him, solid and real and anchoring. "Okay," he said quietly. "Okay. But they eat with me." He gestured to the SEALs. They stood up when no one else would. "They're part of this." "Of course," Caruso said. "Sarah, please, the table by the window. The large one. Our best." Sarah moved immediately, relief and purpose flooding her features. She began arranging the table, adding chairs for the SEALs, adjusting the settings with hands that shook slightly, but worked with determination. Davis stood, offering Jake a small smile. "We'll still need statements before you eat, but it won't take long. And Mr. Morrison, thank you. For your service, yes, but also for giving him a chance to make this right. That takes strength too." Wong was already organizing the statement-taking process, directing his officers to different witnesses, creating a systematic documentation of everything that had transpired. The young red-headed officer approached Rodriguez. "Sir, if you could walk me through what you observed from the beginning." Rodriguez nodded, but his eyes never left Jake. I observed a combat veteran being denied his basic civil rights by a civilian who forgot that freedom isn't free, that it's paid for by men like the staff sergeant in blood and bone and pieces of themselves they'll never get back. The officer was writing, but his hand faltered at the words. He was young, maybe 25, and something in his face suggested he was processing more than just facts. He was understanding the weight of what he was documenting. The businessman who'd offered to donate approached Jake's wheelchair, his eyes red-rimmed. "Sir, I meant what I said. I'd like to pay for your meal and make a donation in your name. My company does matching funds for veteran charities. If you'll allow it, I'd like to make it substantial." Jake looked up at him, overwhelmed. "You don't have to." "I know I don't have to. I want to. Because if I'm honest with myself, I almost looked away tonight. I almost let it happen. And that's on me. So please let me do this. Let me be better than I almost wasn't." The admission cost the man something. You could see it in his face. He was well-dressed, successful, the kind of person who probably thought of himself as a good guy, a moral person. And tonight he'd confronted the gap between who he thought he was and who he actually was when tested. "Thank you," Jake said simply, because what else could you say to that kind of raw honesty? The elderly woman approached next, her husband beside her, moving slowly with his cane. "Young man," she said, and her voice carried the authority of years and experience. "My husband and I would like to add something. We'd like to establish a fund, a real one properly set up to help veterans dine at establishments throughout San Diego. No one should have to fight this battle again." Jake's mouth opened, but no words came. This was spiraling beyond anything he'd imagined, beyond a meal, beyond one night, into something that felt too big to process. Rodriguez placed a hand on Jake's shoulder, grounding him. "Staff Sergeant, you don't have to decide anything right now. Just breathe. Take it one moment at a time." "I don't understand," Jake whispered. "I just wanted dinner. How did this become this?" "Because you mattered," Tank said, his massive frame somehow gentle as he knelt beside the wheelchair. "Because what happened to you matters. Because every single person in this room almost failed you, and now they're trying to make it right. Let them. Let us." Wong approached with his notepad. "Mr. Morrison, I need your statement. Can you walk me through what happened from when you first arrived?" Jake nodded, steadying himself. "I made a reservation 3 days ago. I confirmed it this morning. I got here at 6:28. I was early because I was nervous. This was my first time eating out alone since—" He gestured to his legs. "Since Afghanistan. My therapist at the VA suggested it. Gradual exposure, she called it. Reconnecting with normal activities." Wong wrote carefully, capturing every detail. "And when you entered the restaurant?" "Sarah greeted me. The hostess. She was kind, professional. But when she saw Rex, my service dog, she got uncertain. She went to check with management. That's when Mr. Caruso came out." "And what did Mr. Caruso say to you?" Jake's jaw clenched, the memory still fresh and raw. "He said they don't serve dogs. I explained that Rex is a service animal protected under the ADA. He claimed private property rights health codes. I cited the specific law service animals are exempt from health code restrictions and must be accommodated in public spaces. He told me I was causing a disturbance and needed to leave." "Did he physically threaten you or touch you?" "No. But he threatened to call security to remove me. That's when—" Jake glanced at Rodriguez. "When these men stood up." Wong looked at the SEALs with open curiosity. "Lieutenant Commander, what prompted your intervention?" Rodriguez's answer was simple, direct. "We saw a brother being violated. We responded." "And Mr. Caruso's reaction to your intervention?" "He escalated," Viper supplied. "Threatened to have us all arrested for trespassing. That's when he threatened Sarah, told her she'd lose her job if she helped." Sarah, standing near the window table, nodded confirmation. He said it in front of everyone. I was trying to explain that the law was clear that we had to accommodate service animals, and he told me to be quiet or I'd be fired. Wong made another note, his expression hardening. The picture he was building was damning a clear pattern of discrimination compounded by retaliation and attempted intimidation. Davis had finished with her witnesses and returned to the center of the confrontation. Mr. Caruso, I need to be clear about something. Based on the statements we're collecting, you violated multiple federal statutes tonight. The ADA violation alone carries civil penalties up to $75,000 for a first offense. The retaliation against your employee adds another layer of liability. And calling 911 with a false report of aggressive behavior could constitute filing a false police report, which is a misdemeanor. The color drained from Caruso's face. The full weight of his actions was crystallizing into legal reality, into potential consequences that could destroy everything he'd built. However, Davis continued, and her tone shifted slightly. The resolution of these issues largely depends on Mr. Morrison's choices. He's the aggrieved party. If he chooses to file complaints, we'll support that. If he chooses a different path, that's his right too. All eyes turned to Jake. The power had shifted completely. The man who'd been told to leave, who'd been humiliated and dismissed, now held the fate of the restaurant and its owner in his hands. Jake sat there. Rex pressed against him, and you could see the war playing out behind his eyes. Part of him wanted justice, wanted consequences, wanted Caruso to feel even a fraction of the pain and humiliation he'd inflicted. But another part, the part that had seen enough destruction, enough punishment, enough battles, just wanted peace. I want to tell my story, Jake said finally. I want Mr. Caruso to hear it, to really hear it. And then I want to eat dinner. And then we'll see. Wong nodded slowly. That's fair. We'll wait for our statements to be completed anyway. Take your time. Sarah finished preparing the table by the window, and Rodriguez helped Jake navigate to it, the wheelchair rolling smoothly across the hardwood floor. The SEALs took seats around him, a protective formation, even in this moment of relative safety. Caruso stood uncertainly nearby, unsure if he was invited or if his presence would be an intrusion. Sit down, Jake said, not quite an invitation, but not hostile either. You wanted to hear this. Then hear it. Caruso sat his hands folded on the table like a penitent, like a student before a particularly stern teacher. The restaurant had gone quiet again, but it was an attentive quiet now. People leaning in, wanting to witness this moment of truth. Jake took a drink of the water Sarah had brought his hand, shaking slightly as he lifted the glass. Rex's head rested on his lap, a warm weight that kept him grounded. I enlisted when I was 19. Jake began, his voice soft, but carrying in the silence. Straight out of high school in Nebraska. Small town, not much opportunity, and I wanted to serve. Wanted to be part of something bigger than myself. My grandfather fought in Vietnam. My dad was too young for the draft, missed Desert Storm by a year. I grew up on their stories, on this idea that serving your country was the highest calling. He paused, gathering himself. Rodriguez sat perfectly still, a silent pillar of support. Tank's massive hands were flat on the table, grounding. Viper had put his phone away, giving this moment the privacy and respect it deserved. Ghost's pale eyes were fixed on Jake, present in his stillness. Basic training at Fort Benning. Infantry. I was good at it. The discipline, the structure, the mission. Got assigned to the 101st Airborne. Did 2 deployments to Iraq, came home, then got orders for Afghanistan. Helmand Province. That was the deployment that changed everything. His voice caught, and he had to stop, had to breathe through the surge of memory that threatened to drown him. We were on patrol. Standard sweep through a village that intel said was housing Taliban fighters. It was hot. God, it was always hot there. September, and it felt like walking through an oven. We'd done 100 patrols just like it. Checked compounds, talked to locals, looked for weapons caches. Routine. The word routine came out bitter because nothing was routine when it could kill you. My buddy Marcus, no relation. He glanced at Rodriguez with a ghost of a smile. Marcus was on point. I was third in formation. We were moving through a courtyard when he stopped, signaled for us to hold. He'd seen something wires, maybe, or disturbed earth. The LT called for the EOD guys, and we started to pull back, establish a perimeter. Jake's breathing was faster now, shallow, and Rex pressed harder against him, applying the deep pressure that was supposed to calm the autonomic response to tell his body that the danger was past, that he was safe. I was moving backward, keeping my sector covered when the ground just disappeared. That's what it felt like. 1 second I was there, whole intact. The next there was this massive pressure, this wall of force, and then nothing. I don't remember the explosion itself. Don't remember the pain. I woke up 3 days later at Landstuhl Medical Center in Germany, and the first thing I saw was the doctor's face, and I knew. Before anyone said anything, I knew something was gone. Tears were streaming down Sarah's face. The elderly woman was gripping her husband's hand so hard her knuckles were white. Even Wong had stopped writing, just listening, bearing witness to this testament of sacrifice. They told me I'd lost my right leg above the knee, my left leg below the knee. Severe trauma to my pelvis. Internal injuries. I'd need multiple surgeries, months of recovery, extensive rehabilitation. The doc, he was trying to be gentle, trying to prepare me, but all I could think was, I'm 27 years old, and I'll never walk again. Never run. Never stand at my own wedding or dance with my wife or chase my kids around a backyard. His voice broke completely then, and he had to stop, had to cover his face with his hands, while Rex whined and licked at his wrists, trying to absorb the pain. Rodriguez reached over his hand, gripping Jake's shoulder with the kind of pressure that said, I'm here, brother. You're not alone in this. Tank leaned forward, his massive presence somehow comforting rather than intimidating. Viper's eyes were wet, though he'd deny it later. Ghost remained still, but there was something in his pale gaze that spoke of understanding of shared darkness of battles that didn't end when you came home. Jake lowered his hands, his face blotchy and raw, and continued. The rehab was hell. Worse than the explosion in some ways, because the explosion was over in seconds. The rehab went on for months, learning to balance, learning to walk with prosthetics that felt like they belonged to someone else, learning to do basic things, shower, dress, use the bathroom, things everyone takes for granted. And the pain. They tell you about phantom limb pain, but until you experience it, until you wake up at 3 a.m. with your legs on fire, except they're not there, you can't understand it. Caruso's face had gone gray. He sat there, hands trembling on the table, and you could see something breaking inside him, not just guilt, but genuine horror at what he'd almost dismissed, what he'd tried to erase from his carefully curated world. I spent 8 months at Walter Reed. Jake continued, his voice steadier, now finding strength in the telling. They fitted me for prosthetics, state-of-the-art stuff. Microprocessor knees, computerized ankles. Technology that would have seemed like science fiction 20 years ago. And it helped I could walk, sort of. I could move through the world, but it wasn't the same. Would never be the same. He paused to drink more water, his throat dry from the emotional weight of the story. Sarah had quietly brought bread to the table, olive oil and balsamic, though no one had ordered it. Just something to do, some way to serve, to be part of this moment of transformation. The nightmare started about 3 months in. PTSD, they called it. Post-traumatic stress disorder. Like giving it a name made it manageable, made it something you could file away and deal with. But it wasn't manageable. I'd wake up screaming, convinced I was back in that courtyard, convinced the explosion was happening again. My girlfriend fiancé, actually, she tried to help. God, she tried. But after 6 months of me waking up swinging of panic attacks in grocery stores, of me being unable to handle crowds or loud noises or unexpected touches, she left. The admission seemed to cost him something, seemed to expose a wound that hadn't healed. She said she couldn't watch me destroy myself anymore. Said she needed someone whole, someone who could be present, someone who didn't flinch every time a car backfired. And I understood. I hated her for it, but I understood. Who wants to sign up for a lifetime of that? Someone who actually loved you, Tank said quietly, his voice rumbling with barely controlled anger. Someone worthy of you. Jake managed a weak smile. Maybe, but at the time it felt like confirmation. Like proof that the explosion hadn't just taken my legs, it had taken my future, my chance at normal, my ability to be loved. The restaurant was utterly silent now. Even the kitchen noise had stopped. Everyone was listening, bearing witness to this confession, this testimony of what war actually cost. The VA assigned me to Dr. Chen, brilliant woman, patient kind. She specialized in combat trauma. She was the one who suggested Rex. A service dog trained to detect panic attacks before they fully manifest, to provide deep pressure therapy to help me navigate crowds and public spaces. I was skeptical. I'm not a dog person, never was. But she insisted, said it could change everything. Rex's tail thumped against the floor at the mention of his name, and despite everything, several people in the restaurant smiled through their tears. Rex came to me about 11 months ago, trained by an organization that works with combat veterans, specifically with amputees and PTSD cases. And Dr. Chen was right, he changed everything. He could sense my panic attacks sometimes 20 minutes before I felt them. He'd start pressing against me, insisting on contact, forcing me to focus on something other than the rising terror. He'd wake me from nightmares by licking my face. He'd position himself between me and crowds, creating space, creating safety. Jake's hand moved through Rex's fur, the gesture automatic grounding. But even with Rex, even with the prosthetics, even with therapy twice a week, I couldn't face the world. Couldn't go to restaurants, couldn't go to movies, couldn't do anything that required me to be in public, to be seen, to risk the stares and the pity and the questions. I became a ghost in my own life. Delivery food, online shopping, everything through screens and apps and careful distance. And we're going to finish our pancakes, okay? Even though there's cameras outside, Max's voice was small. Especially because there's cameras outside, Ava said firmly. We don't let other people's rudeness ruin our pancakes. That's a rule. A tiny smile crept onto Max's face. Is that a real rule? It is now. Ethan had his phone out, scrolling through something, and when he looked up, his expression was thunderous. Ava, you need to see this. He handed her the phone, and Ava's stomach dropped. It was a news article published 20 minutes ago. TechVision CEO's dark secret leaked documents reveal accident details prior company knowledge. With trembling hands, Ava clicked the link. The article was brutal, clinical, and deeply invasive. It included medical records from her accident, police reports, insurance documents, all things that should have been sealed, private, protected. He glanced around, taking in the elegant decor, the expensive atmosphere. Because I wanted to prove I could belong somewhere like this. Somewhere fancy, somewhere that represented normal people living normal lives. Caruso made a sound, something between a sob and a gasp, his hand covering his mouth. I sat in my van for 17 minutes before I found the courage to come in. Jake continued, and his voice was raw now, stripped of all pretense. 17 minutes of telling myself I could do this, that I deserved this, that I was more than my injuries. And when I finally came through that door, when Sarah greeted me kindly, I thought maybe I was right. Maybe I could do this. He looked directly at Caruso now, and there was no anger in his gaze, just exhaustion, just sadness, just the weight of carrying more than any person should have to carry. And then you told me to leave. Told me that my service dog, my lifeline, wasn't welcome. That I wasn't the right kind of customer. That my disability, my sacrifice, my visible reminder that freedom costs something, that it ruined your image, your ambiance, your carefully constructed illusion that the world is beautiful and perfect and unmarred by the reality of what it takes to keep it that way. The words fell like hammer blows, each one landing with devastating accuracy. Caruso was openly crying now, his carefully groomed facade completely shattered. "I didn't know," he whispered. "I didn't understand. I just saw God help me. I just saw a problem, a disruption, something that didn't fit. And I tried to erase it, to make it go away, to protect my little kingdom without considering what I was protecting it from." "You saw a cripple," Jake said bluntly, using the word like a weapon, like something that could cut. "You saw damaged goods." But the sensor manufacturer's name caught her eye. Quantum Sensors Limited. She knew that name, not from 3 years ago, but from recent news. Carter had been in negotiations to acquire them as part of his supply chain consolidation strategy. She'd opposed it in the last board meeting because their quality control metrics were inconsistent. "Oh my God," she breathed. "What?" Ethan was watching her carefully. "The sensors that failed in my accident, they were manufactured by Quantum Sensors, the same company Carter is trying to buy." Ava's mind was racing now, pieces clicking together. If there's a pattern of quality control issues, if their products have a history of failure that tanks their valuation, Carter would lose millions on the acquisition. "So he leaked your accident records to make it look like you knew about problems and covered them up," Ethan said slowly. "If you're discredited, removed as CEO, then your opposition to the acquisition doesn't matter." Wong had given up pretending to take notes, his pen idle in his hand, as he listened to this exchange that had transcended a simple police matter and become something closer to a national reckoning. "I have a question," Rodriguez said, his voice cutting through the emotion with tactical precision. "Mr. Caruso, you've apologized. You've admitted fault. But here's what I need to know: what happens tomorrow, next week, when the cameras are gone and the police have left, and this moment has faded into memory. What happens to the next veteran who walks through your door?" The question hung in the air, essential and damning, because this was the real test, not the apology, not the admission of guilt, but the commitment to actual change. Caruso looked at Rodriguez, then at Jake, then around the restaurant at the faces watching him, judging him, waiting to see what kind of man he actually was beneath the expensive suit and the practiced charm. "I don't know," he said finally, and the honesty of it was almost worse than a lie would have been. "I want to say I'll be different, I'll be better, I'll welcome everyone with open arms. But I don't know. I don't know if I can undo a lifetime of looking away, of preferring comfort to compassion, of choosing image over humanity." "Then learn," Tank said, his voice gentle despite his size. "Choose to learn. Every day. It's not complicated, you just treat people like people. You see them, you acknowledge them, you serve them with the same dignity you'd want for yourself." "But how do I—" Caruso started, then stopped himself. "I don't even know what questions to ask. I don't know what I don't know." Sarah stepped forward, her voice tentative but gaining strength. "You could start by asking, by listening, by training your staff properly on ADA requirements, by making it clear that everyone is welcome here, that accessibility isn't a burden, but a responsibility." The young hostess was finding her voice, stepping into her own power, and you could see the transformation happening in real time. The elderly veteran couple approached the table, the husband leaning heavily on his cane. "Son," the old man addressed Caruso, his voice carrying the weight of decades. "I've seen men like you before. Men who made mistakes, who failed to see what was right in front of them. Some of them learned. Some of them didn't. The difference wasn't in the mistake. Everyone makes mistakes. The difference was in what they did after." His wife nodded, her hand resting on her husband's arm. We meant what we said about the fund, a program to help veterans access restaurants throughout San Diego. But it needs a flagship location somewhere that commits to being truly accessible, truly welcoming. Somewhere that trains other establishments on how to do it right. She looked at Caruso meaningfully. It could be here, if you're willing. Caruso's eyes widened. You'd trust me with that after what I did. We'd give you the chance to earn that trust, the woman corrected. There's a difference. Jake watched this unfold with something like wonder. What had started as his personal humiliation, his private failure to achieve one normal evening, had transformed into something larger, a moment of collective reckoning, a chance for systematic change, a possibility that his pain might prevent someone else's. I need to know something, Jake said, his voice cutting through the planning and the promises. Mr. Caruso, why did you change your mind? You were ready to have me arrested. You were doubling down, protecting your position. What changed? Caruso was quiet for a long moment, visibly wrestling with the question. When the police arrived, he said slowly, when Officer Wong asked what happened, I had a choice. I could lie, spin it, make myself the victim, or I could tell the truth. And I looked at you sitting there with tears on your face, and I saw... He struggled for the words. I saw my father. The non sequitur caught everyone off guard. My father immigrated from Italy in 1968, spoke barely any English, faced discrimination everywhere he went. People saw him as less than as a problem, as someone who didn't belong. He built his construction business from nothing, faced down prejudice and hate, and people who wanted him to fail. And he used to tell me, Vincent, you never forget what it feels like to be treated as less than human. You remember, and you make sure you never do it to someone else. Caruso's voice broke. And I forgot. I became successful, built this restaurant, surrounded myself with wealth and privilege, and I forgot what it felt like to be dismissed, to be erased, to be told you don't belong. I looked at you and saw an inconvenience instead of a human being, and for just a moment when the police asked me to explain, I saw my father's face, saw his disappointment, saw the man I'd become, the very thing he'd warned me against. The confession was devastating in its honesty, in the way it revealed not just individual failing, but generational betrayal, the way privilege could make you forget your own history of being othered. Rodriguez exchanged glances with his team. This was beyond what they'd expected, beyond a simple confrontation over discrimination. This was touching something deeper, the American story of immigrants and veterans, of who belongs and who doesn't, of how quickly the oppressed can become the oppressor when given the chance. Wong stepped forward, his notepad finally closing. Mr. Morrison, I have enough for my report. The question now is how you want to proceed. You can file a formal complaint with the Department of Justice. I can facilitate that. You can pursue civil action. We have multiple witnesses and video evidence. Or... He paused, looking around the restaurant at the transformation happening in real time. Or you can choose a different path. It's entirely your decision. All eyes turned to Jake again. The power remained with him, the choice his to make. Jake sat there, one hand in Rex's fur, the other gripping his water glass, like it was the only solid thing in a shifting world. His therapist's voice echoed in his mind. Healing isn't about revenge, Jake. It's about reclaiming your power, your dignity, your right to exist in the world. I don't want him destroyed, Jake said finally, the words coming slowly, carefully. I don't want lawsuits or complaints or his business ruined. But I also don't want this to happen again. To anyone. Ever. He looked at Caruso. Really looked at him, seeing past the tears and the expensive suit to the flawed human underneath. I want you to do better. Not just say you'll do better, actually do it. Make this place accessible. Train your staff. Put up signs that service animals are welcome. Partner with veteran organizations. Turn this restaurant into an example of what right looks like. Yes, Caruso said immediately. Yes, I'll do all of that. I swear it. And Jake continued, his voice strengthening. I want you to remember this feeling, this shame, this horror, this recognition of what you almost did. Because the day you forget, the day you get comfortable again, the day you start seeing people as problems instead of humans, that's the day you become this person again. The words landed like prophecy, like warning, like the kind of wisdom that only came from suffering. The businessman who'd offered the donation stood up. I'd like to propose something. My company works with veteran employment programs. Mr. Caruso, what if Bella Vista became a training site? Hire veterans for your staff, give them experience in hospitality. Create pathways to employment across the restaurant industry. The lawyer at the bar chimed in. And I'll provide pro bono legal services to establish the accessibility fund properly. Create real infrastructure for change, not just good intentions. Sarah spoke up, her voice clear and determined. I'll coordinate with local veteran organizations. Create a database of accessible establishments, work with restaurants to improve their ADA compliance, make San Diego a model city for veteran-friendly dining. Ideas were flowing now, momentum, building the possibility of transformation becoming concrete and real. What had started as one man's humiliation was becoming a movement, a blueprint for systemic change. Rodriguez stood his team, rising with him, a wall of strength and solidarity. Staff Sergeant Morrison, we came here tonight for a quiet dinner. We're leaving having witnessed something rare, actual courage. Not the battlefield kind, the harder kind. The kind that chooses forgiveness over revenge, that chooses growth over punishment, that chooses hope over bitterness. He turned to Caruso. You've been given a gift tonight, Mr. Caruso. A chance to be better than your worst moment. Don't waste it. Caruso nodded, unable to speak, overwhelmed by the weight of responsibility and possibility. Davis approached Jake one last time. Mr. Morrison, we're going to document everything that happened here tonight. Not for prosecution if you're choosing not to pursue that, but for the record. So there's a trail and accountability measure. If Mr. Caruso fails to follow through, if this happens again, there's evidence. Protection for the next person. Thank you, Jake said, and he meant it. The protection wasn't just legal, it was moral, a safeguard against backsliding, against the comfort of forgetting. Wong handed Jake a card. My direct number. If you change your mind, if you need anything, call, day or night. What you did tonight, choosing education over retribution, that takes more guts than most people have. The officers began to leave their work done. The incident documented and resolved in a way that satisfied both law and justice. The other diners slowly returned to their meals, but the energy in the restaurant had fundamentally changed. It wasn't just a place to eat anymore. It was a place where something important had happened, where the moral arc had bent, however slightly, toward justice. Sarah brought menus to the table, her smile tentative, but real. Gentlemen, everything is prepared. Chef wants to send out his specialties. He says it would be an honor to cook for you. Tank grinned, the tension finally breaking. Well, I'm not going to turn down free food from a fancy Italian place. What do you say, Staff Sergeant? Think you can handle some quality pasta after all that? Jake laughed, and it was a real laugh, the kind that came from relief and release, and the sheer absurdity of how this evening had unfolded. Yeah, I think I can handle it. As they settled into order, as the normal rhythms of dining began to reassert themselves, Caruso approached the table one last time. Mr. Morrison, may I shake your hand? Jake looked at the offered hand, manicured wealthy, belonging to a man who'd tried to erase him just an hour before. For a moment he hesitated. Then he reached out and gripped it firmly. "Make it count," Jake said quietly. "Make tonight count." "I will," Caruso promised. "I swear to God, I will." As the dinner progressed, as the seals swapped stories and laughter gradually replaced tears, something remarkable happened. Other diners began approaching not with pity, but with respect. A young boy, maybe 8 years old, came over with his parents and saluted Jake with fierce seriousness. An older woman kissed his cheek and whispered, "Thank you." A group of college students asked if they could take a photo with him, not as a curiosity, but as someone they admired. Jake handled it all with growing confidence, with Rex by his side, with brothers at his table, who understood what it meant to serve, to sacrifice, to come home, changed. The food when it came was extraordinary handmade pasta, perfectly cooked proteins, sauces that spoke of generations of tradition. But more than the food, it was the atmosphere, the sense of having crossed some threshold, of having transformed a space through the alchemy of confrontation and forgiveness. Rodriguez raised his wine glass. "To standing up when others look away." The table echoed the toast glasses clinking, and Jake added his own, "To Brotherhood." On the battlefield and off. As they ate, as the evening stretched on, word began to spread beyond the restaurant. Phones that had been recording had uploaded videos. Social media was lighting up with hashtags, "Justice." For Jake. Veterans, welcome Bella Vista redemption. The story was escaping the confines of 4 walls, spreading across the city, across the country, becoming something larger than any of them had anticipated. But in that moment, in that table by the window, with the San Diego night glittering beyond the glass, Jake Morrison wasn't thinking about viral videos or social movements or systematic change. He was just eating dinner. Surrounded by brothers he'd just met, but who'd stood for him when it mattered. In a restaurant that had tried to reject him, but had become the site of his reclamation. He was doing the one thing he'd thought he'd lost forever. He was living normally, existing in the world, taking up space without apology. And for the first time in 2 years, it felt like enough. The pasta was halfway finished when Jake's phone started buzzing with notifications, a steady stream that turned into a flood, his screen lighting up like a Christmas tree. He glanced down confused, then looked up at Viper with dawning realization. "It's everywhere," Viper said quietly, his own phone in hand. "Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, TikTok. The videos are going viral. We're talking millions of views in the last 30 minutes. Jake's stomach clenched. "Millions." "Your story is resonating," Rodriguez said, scrolling through his own feed. "People are sharing it, commenting, tagging veteran organizations, disability rights groups. This is bigger than just one restaurant now." Tank showed his screen to the table. A news alert from a local San Diego station. "Breaking disabled veteran discriminated against at upscale restaurant Navy SEALs intervene." Another notification popped up from CNN. Viral video shows veteran with service dog denied service. "Oh God," Jake whispered, his hand finding Rex's fur automatically. "I didn't want this. I didn't want to be a story, a headline, a symbol." Ghost finished quietly. "But you are now. The question is what you do with it." Sarah approached the table, her phone also in hand, her expression a mixture of excitement and concern. "Mr. Caruso wants to speak with you. The phone's been ringing non-stop, news stations, veteran organizations, even the mayor's office. Everyone wants a statement." Jake looked around the table at the SEALs, these men who'd become his unexpected brothers in the span of a few hours. I don't know how to handle this. This is combat I'm not trained for. Rodriguez's expression was thoughtful, tactical. Then we handle it the same way we handle any mission, with planning precision and a clear objective. What do you want to come out of this, Jake? What's your mission? The question cut through the panic, giving Jake something to anchor to. He thought about Dr. Chen's office at the VA, about the other veterans he'd seen there. Some missing limbs, some carrying invisible wounds, all of them struggling to find their place in a world that didn't always make room for them. I want it to matter, he said finally. I want what happened tonight to mean something for every veteran who comes after me. I want them to be able to walk into any restaurant, any store, any public space, and be treated with dignity, not as heroes, just as humans. Then that's your message, Rodriguez said. Simple, clear, powerful, and we control how it gets delivered. Caruso appeared at the edge of the table, his face drawn but determined. Mr. Morrison, I know this is overwhelming, but I think we have an opportunity here. If you're willing. The media attention, we could use it to launch something real. The accessibility initiative, the veteran employment program, all of it. Turn this moment into a movement. Jake studied Caruso, looking for any hint of opportunism, of using this for personal gain. But what he saw was something different. Genuine commitment mixed with the recognition that redemption required action, not just words. What exactly are you proposing? Tank asked, his protective instincts on high alert. A press conference, Caruso said. Tomorrow, here at Bella Vista. Mr. Morrison tells his story, his real story, in his own words. I publicly commit to making this restaurant fully accessible, to hiring veterans, to creating the training program. We announce the fund that the Hendersons want to establish. He gestured to the elderly couple. And we invite other restaurants to join us. Make this the beginning of citywide, maybe even statewide change. The proposal hung in the air, ambitious and terrifying in equal measure. He'd be exposed, Viper said bluntly. Every news outlet in the country would run with this. His privacy, his ability to process this privately gone. I know, Caruso acknowledged. And if Mr. Morrison says no, that's his absolute right. But if he says yes, I promise, I swear that we do this right. We protect him. We honor his story. We make sure this serves the mission he just articulated, not my reputation or anyone else's agenda. Jake's phone buzzed again, this time a call. The screen showed a Virginia area code. He answered tentatively. Hello. Staff Sergeant Morrison. This is Colonel Patricia Hendricks, U.S. Army Public Affairs. I'm calling because your story has reached the Pentagon. We've been monitoring the situation, and I want you to know that you have the full support of the Department of Defense if you choose to speak publicly about what happened tonight. Jake's eyes widened. He put the phone on speaker so the table could hear. Colonel, I'm just a retired staff sergeant. I didn't want this attention. I understand that, son. But sometimes the most important battles aren't the ones we choose, they're the ones that choose us. What happened to you tonight is happening to veterans across this country every single day. Most of those incidents don't have witnesses. They don't have video evidence. They don't have Navy SEALs standing up for what's right. You have a platform now, whether you wanted it or not. The question is whether you're willing to use it. The words echoed Rodriguez's earlier question, coming now from the highest levels of military leadership. If I do this, Jake said slowly, if I speak out, what happens? What changes? Colonel Hendricks's voice was firm, authoritative. We push for stronger enforcement of the ADA. We work with the Department of Justice to create clearer guidelines for businesses. We partner with veteran organizations to provide education and resources. We make noise, Sergeant, loud enough that this becomes unacceptable, that businesses know there will be consequences, that veterans know they have support. But it starts with your voice, your story. Jake looked at Rex, at the dog, who'd helped him reclaim pieces of his life. At Rodriguez and his team, who'd stood up when they could have looked away. At Caruso, who'd been forced to confront his own prejudice and was now offering a path to redemption. At Sarah Young and idealistic, ready to fight for something that mattered. "I'll do it," he said, and the words felt like stepping off a cliff, like the moment before a parachute opens when you're not sure if you're falling or flying. "I'll do the press conference. I'll tell my story, but on my terms. I don't want this to be about pity or inspiration porn. I want it to be about change, real systemic change." The colonel's approval was evident in her voice. "Understood. I'll have a team there tomorrow to support you. We'll make sure this is done right." As Jake ended the call, the weight of the decision settled over him. Tomorrow he would stand in front of cameras and microphones and tell the world about the worst moment of his life, about his struggle to rebuild, about being denied basic dignity in a place that should have welcomed him. Tomorrow he would transform his private pain into public purpose. But tonight, he was going to finish his dinner. The meal continued, but the atmosphere had shifted again. There was purpose now, direction, a sense that they were all part of something larger than themselves. Other diners continued to approach, offering support, sharing their own stories of loved ones who'd served of disabilities, faced of discrimination, experienced. Each story added weight to what tomorrow would mean, to why it mattered. A woman in her 50s approached, tears streaming down her face. "My son came back from Iraq with a traumatic brain injury. He can't work regular hours, has trouble in loud environments, struggles with crowds. He's been denied service, asked to leave places, treated like he's broken. I want him to see your press conference tomorrow. I want him to know he's not alone." Jake reached out and took her hand. "Tell him he's not. Tell him there are thousands of us fighting to make this better. And tell him it gets easier. Not easy, but easier." The woman nodded, squeezing his hand before walking away. Rodriguez's phone rang. He glanced at the screen, his expression shifting to something between surprise and respect. "I need to take this." He stepped away from the table, his voice low as he spoke. When he returned, his face was unreadable. "That was Admiral Hutchinson. Warcom Commander. He's heard about tonight. He wants to make tomorrow's press conference a joint DoD event, Army and Navy standing together for veteran rights. He's sending a delegation." Tank let out a low whistle. "This is getting big, Staff Sergeant. Really big." "Too big?" Jake asked, vulnerability showing through. "No," Ghost said quietly, his pale eyes intense. "Exactly big enough. Change doesn't happen in whispers. It happens when the noise becomes impossible to ignore." Sarah returned with dessert tiramisu and panna cotta elaborate presentations that spoke of a kitchen trying to make amends through excellence. But she also carried something else, a folder. "Mr. Morrison, these are letters," she said, setting the folder beside his plate. "In the last hour, people have been writing them, asking me to give them to you. Some are from veterans, some are from people with disabilities. Some are just from people who are ashamed they didn't speak up sooner. I thought you might want to see them." Jake opened the folder with trembling hands. The first letter was on restaurant napkin, written in shaky script. "I lost my arm in Vietnam. For 40 years I've hidden it, kept it covered, avoided situations where people might stare. Tonight, watching you fight for your dignity, I realized I've been giving them power they don't deserve. Tomorrow I'm wearing short sleeves. Thank you for your courage." The words blurred as tears filled Jake's eyes. He passed the letter to Rodriguez, who read it and passed it on each member of the table, bearing witness to this stranger's transformation. Another letter, this one more polished. I'm the mother of a son with cerebral palsy. He uses a wheelchair. We've been denied entry to restaurants, told his chair is a fire hazard, asked to sit in back corners where we won't disturb other diners. I've taught him to accept it, to not make waves. Tonight showed me I've been teaching him the wrong lesson. Tomorrow we're going to demand better. For him. For all of us. On letter after letter, each one a testament to the ripple effects of one man's refusal to be erased one moment of standing up when it would have been easier to walk away. The Henderson couple approached the table again, the elderly veteran moving slowly with his cane. Son, he addressed Jake, my wife and I have been talking. The fund we mentioned, we want to do more. We want to establish a foundation. The Henderson Morrison Foundation for Veteran Accessibility. Use our resources, your story, to create real infrastructure for change across California. Jake's mouth opened, but no words came. The magnitude of it having his name attached to something so significant, so permanent, was overwhelming. You don't have to answer now, Mrs. Henderson said gently, but think about it. Think about what your name on that foundation would mean to every veteran struggling to find their place in the world. Think about the legacy you could build from this one terrible, beautiful night. As they walked away, Viper leaned in. You know what's happening here, right? You're becoming a symbol whether you're ready or not. The face of veteran accessibility rights. That's a heavy load, brother. Can I handle it? Jake asked, not rhetorical, but genuine, seeking honest assessment from men who'd faced impossible odds. Rodriguez considered the question seriously. 6 months ago, probably not. But you're not the man you were 6 months ago. You fought your way back from an IED blast. You clawed your way through PTSD and phantom pain, and the loss of everything you thought defined you. You found the courage to walk into this restaurant tonight, knowing it might break you. And when it did break you, when you were at your lowest, you chose forgiveness over vengeance. Yeah, Jake, you can handle it. The affirmation settled into Jake's chest, not erasing the fear, but making it manageable, putting it in perspective against everything else he'd survived. The restaurant was beginning to empty, the evening drawing to a natural close. But Caruso approached one more time, and there was something different in his bearing. Not the broken guilt of earlier, but something more solid, more determined. Mr. Morrison, I need to tell you something. In the morning, I'm calling an emergency meeting with my entire staff, kitchen, wait, staff management, everyone. We're going to train on ADA compliance, on how to welcome and serve veterans and people with disabilities. But more than that, we're going to talk about why it matters. I'm going to tell them what happened tonight, what I did, what I almost destroyed. And I'm going to make sure they understand that this restaurant's reputation will be built on inclusion, not exclusion. He paused, gathering courage for what came next. I'm also calling the owners of every restaurant in Little Italy. I'm organizing a coalition. We're going to make this entire neighborhood a model for accessibility. Every restaurant, every shop, every business, veteran-friendly, disability-accessible, committed to dignity for everyone who walks through our doors. Sarah was beaming her faith in the possibility of change vindicated. I'll help coordinate it. I'll reach out to veteran organizations, create resource materials, develop training protocols. This can work. This can really work. Tank raised his glass. To Bella Vista. From ground zero of discrimination to the flagship of change. That's one hell of a redemption arc. They toasted, but Jake was quiet, processing the transformation he'd inadvertently sparked. His phone buzzed again, another notification. This time a video someone had compiled, cutting together footage from multiple phones in the restaurant. It showed his arrival. Caruso's refusal, the SEALs standing up, the police arriving, And finally, the current moment, a table full of brothers breaking bread, building bridges. The video had 17 million views. Jesus, Jake breathed. 17 million people have watched this. And every one of them is seeing what happens when people choose courage over comfort, Rodriguez said. When they stand up instead of looking away. That's the story going viral, Jake. Not your disability, not your struggle. The story of ordinary people becoming extraordinary in the moment that demands it. As the evening wound down, as the check was settled, or rather refused, with Caruso insisting everything was complimentary, Jake found himself surrounded by the people who'd transformed this nightmare into something approaching hope. The SEALs who'd stood up, the police officers who'd enforced justice with compassion, the civilians who'd added their voices to the chorus of change, Sarah who'd risked her job to do what was right, Caruso who'd faced his own darkness and chosen light. "What happens now?" Jake asked Rodriguez as they prepared to leave. "Tomorrow I face the cameras. But after that? After the news cycle moves on and the viral videos are replaced by the next moment of outrage, what then?" Rodriguez's answer was simple, profound. "Then you keep living. You keep showing up. You keep taking up space in the world without apology. Because that's how change becomes permanent, not through one dramatic moment, but through the daily, relentless insistence on dignity." As they stood to leave, as Rex shook himself and prepared to guide Jake back out into the world, something unexpected happened. The kitchen staff emerged, led by the head chef, a stern-looking man in his 60s with flour on his apron and tears on his face. "Staff Sergeant," he said, his Italian accent thick with emotion. "I served. Italian Army 1980s. I understand what you carry, and I want you to know you come to this restaurant anytime, any day you are family. You sit at the best table, you eat the best food, and you are treated like the hero you are." He saluted a crisp, perfect military salute that Jake instinctively returned even from his wheelchair. "But more than that," the chef continued, "I train my kitchen to be worthy of serving you. We learn, we grow, we become the restaurant you deserved to find tonight." The entire kitchen staff was there, nodding, some crying, all bearing witness to this moment of transformation. As Jake finally made his way to the door, as Rex guided him across the restaurant floor one more time, the remaining diners stood. One by one, they rose from their tables, not in pity, not in condescension, but in respect, in recognition, in solidarity. It was a standing ovation for a man who'd just wanted dinner. Jake paused at the hostess stand where this had all begun. Sarah stood there, and impulsively he reached out and hugged her. "Thank you," he whispered, "for trying, for caring, for being brave when it cost you something." "Thank you," she replied, "for showing me what courage actually looks like." Outside, the San Diego night was cool and clear, the city lights spreading out like a constellation. The SEALs walked Jake to his van, a protective formation, even now, even in this moment of victory. "You need anything, you call," Rodriguez said, pressing a card into Jake's hand. "Day or night. You're part of the Brotherhood now. That doesn't end when the cameras turn off." Tank pulled Jake into a bear hug that lifted him slightly from his chair. "You did good tonight, Staff Sergeant. Real good." Viper and Ghost added their own goodbyes. Viper with a fist bump, and a promise to help manage the social media storm. Ghost with a rare smile and a simple, "proud to have stood with you." As Jake settled into his van, as Rex jumped into the passenger seat with practiced ease, he looked back at Bella Vista. The golden light still poured from the windows, but it meant something different now. It wasn't the light of exclusion, of privilege that shut others out. It was the light of possibility, of change, of a place that had been broken and was beginning to heal. His phone rang. Dr. Chen. Jake. Her voice was warm, proud. I saw the videos. I've been getting calls from colleagues across the country. What you did tonight, choosing to face your fear, standing up for yourself, turning trauma into transformation, that's the breakthrough we've been working toward. I couldn't have done it alone, Jake said, watching the SEALs walk back toward their own cars, brothers in arms, even in civilian life. But you did do it. And tomorrow, when you face those cameras, you're going to do it again. And the day after that, and the day after that. Because you've remembered something crucial, Jake, you belong in this world. Not in spite of your sacrifices, but because of them. Because you've paid a price that bought all of us the freedom to live our lives, and you deserve to live yours fully, visibly, unapologetically. Tears streamed down Jake's face, but they were different tears now, not shame or fear or humiliation, but relief, the breaking open of something that had been locked tight for too long. I'm proud of you, Dr. Chen said. Your brothers in arms would be proud. Your country should be proud. But most importantly, I hope you're proud of yourself. After they hung up, Jake sat in his van for a long moment. Rex's head resting on his lap. He thought about tomorrow's press conference, about the foundation that would bear his name, about the changes that might ripple out from this one terrible, beautiful night. But mostly he thought about how he'd walked into that restaurant broken and afraid, had been pushed to the edge of despair, and had somehow found his way back, not alone, never alone, but surrounded by brothers who understood that standing up for each other was the only mission that truly mattered. He started the van, Rex settling contentedly beside him. As he pulled away from Bella Vista, he glanced in the rearview mirror one last time. The restaurant glowed in the darkness, a beacon of transformation, a testament to the possibility of change. 6 months later, Jake Morrison stood on a stage in downtown San Diego, surrounded by city officials, veteran advocates, and disability rights leaders. The Henderson Morrison Foundation was officially launching with Bella Vista as its flagship partner. 43 restaurants across San Diego had joined the accessibility initiative. State legislation was pending to strengthen ADA enforcement. Training programs were being implemented across California. But the moment that mattered most came when a young veteran army recently returned from Syria using a wheelchair, accompanied by a service dog, approached Jake after the ceremony. "Staff Sergeant Morrison," the young man said, his voice shaking slightly. "I saw your video. I saw what happened. And last week I went to a restaurant for the first time since I got injured. They welcomed me. They seated me at a good table. They treated me like a person. And I thought of you, of what you went through so that I wouldn't have to." Jake gripped the young man's hand, seeing himself reflected there. The fear, the hope, the tentative belief that maybe, just maybe, the world could make room for them after all. "What's your name, brother?" "Marcus, sir. Marcus Johnson." Jake smiled, thinking of Rodriguez, of that other Marcus who'd stood up when it mattered. "Tell me, Marcus, have you eaten at Bella Vista yet?" "No, sir. I wasn't sure if I'd be welcome." "You are. You absolutely are. And I'm buying. Tonight, if you're free. Bring whoever matters to you. Bring your family, your friends, your dog. We're going to have dinner, and we're going to take up space, and we're going to be normal." The young veteran's eyes filled with tears. "Normal sounds good, sir. Normal sounds really good." That evening, Jake returned to Bella Vista, not as a victim, not as a viral sensation, but as a man coming home to a place that had learned to see him. Sarah greeted him at the hostess stand with a genuine smile. The chef emerged from the kitchen to personally welcome him. And Caruso Vincent, Caruso, who'd tried to erase him and had instead been transformed by him, clasped his hand with real warmth. Welcome back, Jake. Your table's ready. Jake moved through the restaurant with Rex at his side, with young Marcus Johnson following with the belief that they belonged here, that they'd earned the right to exist in this space, that their sacrifices had purchased not just freedom for others, but dignity for themselves. As he settled at the table by the window, as the golden light of Bella Vista washed over him, Jake Morrison looked out at the San Diego night and realized something profound he'd come full circle. From the courtyard in Kandahar, where he'd lost his legs through the dark valleys of rehab and PTSD and despair, to this moment of peace in a restaurant that had tried to reject him and had instead become the birthplace of his redemption. Rodriguez and his team walked through the door because of course they did, because Brotherhood didn't end, because the men who stood up for you once would stand with you forever. They joined the table, and the conversation flowed, and the laughter came easy, and for a few hours they were just men sharing a meal, taking up space in the world, living the normal lives they'd all fought to protect. The last customer left around midnight. Sarah began closing procedures. But before Jake could leave, Caruso approached one final time. "I need you to know something," Caruso said. "Every night before we close, I stand here, and I remember what I almost did, who I almost was, and I make myself a promise that tomorrow I'll be better. That's your gift to me, Jake. Not forgiveness, though you gave that too, but the daily reminder of who I never want to be again." Jake nodded, understanding that redemption wasn't a destination, but a journey that the work of becoming better never ended. As he wheeled out into the night, Rex beside him, brothers at his back, the city lights spreading before him like possibility, Jake Morrison realized that he'd finally found what he'd been seeking. Not the version of normal that existed before the explosion, before the loss, before the pain, but a new normal forged in fire and tempered by struggle, where his scars were part of his story, but didn't define its ending. He belonged here. In this city, in this world, in this life he'd fought so hard to reclaim. And tomorrow, when he woke up, he'd fight for it again. Not because he had to, but because he'd finally remembered that he was worth fighting for. The van's door closed. The engine started. And Jake Morrison drove into the San Diego night whole in his brokenness, strong in his vulnerability, a warrior who'd learned that the hardest battles weren't fought with weapons, but with the simple radical act of refusing to disappear. Behind him, Bella Vista's lights dimmed, but the change that had been born there would burn bright for years to come, a testament to the night 4 brothers stood up. One man found his voice, and a city remembered that dignity isn't earned through perfection, but through the persistent, courageous insistence that everyone deserves a seat at the table. The flag above the restaurant rippled in the night breeze, amber light catching its folds, a symbol of the freedom that men like Jake Morrison had purchased with pieces of themselves' freedom, that now finally included the freedom to simply be human, to simply exist, to simply belong. And in that belonging, Jake Morrison found something he thought he'd lost forever in the sand outside Kandahar, the absolute unshakable certainty that his life broken, rebuilt, imperfect and beautiful mattered.